Sophie Carson never expected to find anything valuable when she bought the old cabin in the mountains for a fraction of the price. The locals called it the haunted house, and no one had dared to live there for years. But when her dog, Max, started digging near the overgrown garden, Sophie discovered something that would change her life forever: a buried safe, rusted and forgotten by time. What was locked inside could either be a blessing or a curse. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear how far these wild adventures go. And if you enjoy tales of forgotten treasures and unexpected finds, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just blow your mind. Sophie Carson had never imagined herself living in the mountains. But after years of city life and a broken career, the idea of starting over in a small, secluded cabin seemed perfect. The house wasn't much to look at. It was old, run down, and had been abandoned for years. The locals whispered about it, calling it the haunted house, and no one had dared to live there for decades. But to Sophie, the house represented a fresh start, a place where she could rebuild herself, piece by piece. The first few days were spent clearing out the overgrown yard, hauling trash, and scrubbing the grimy windows. With every chore she completed, the cabin slowly began to feel more like home. Max, her loyal golden retriever, kept her company, his playful barks echoing through the quiet woods. Though the cabin was in need of serious repairs, Sophie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. One afternoon, as she and Max took a walk along the trail behind the cabin, Max suddenly stopped, his nose to the ground. Sophie followed his gaze and noticed a patch of earth that seemed disturbed, as if something had been buried there long ago. Max's tail wagged as he began to dig, eager to uncover whatever lay beneath. Sophie knelt down, brushing the dirt away, and soon her fingers touched something hard, a metal object, rusted and old. She paused, curiosity surging through her. The dirt gave way to reveal an old metal box, half buried in the earth. It was heavy, the kind of box you would expect to hold something precious. Sophie's heart raced. What was this doing here? It was far too heavy to be trash. Could it be something valuable? Something left behind by the previous owners? Max barked excitedly, as if urging her to open it, but Sophie hesitated. She had just begun to restore the house, and now this strange object seemed to be adding a new layer of mystery to her quiet life. Should she open it? What could possibly be inside? She brushed off the dirt and carefully pried open the latch. The moment she did, a strange chill ran down her spine, as if the house itself had taken a breath. Sophie's eyes widened as she peered inside. There was a thick, dusty layer of air inside, and when she lifted the lid fully, she found a rusted, locked safe. There was something about the safe, something that tugged at her instinct, urging her to find out what it held. The discovery felt far too significant to ignore. Sophie knew she had to unlock it, to uncover the secret it held, even if it meant unraveling something she might not be ready to understand. Sophie's hands shook as she stared at the locked safe. She tried to steady her breathing, but the anticipation was too much. She had to know what was inside. It was as if the safe had been waiting for her, waiting for someone to finally uncover it. For the next few days, Sophie tried everything to open it. She found a small crowbar in the back of the cabin and used it to pry at the edges, but the safe didn't budge. The metal was too thick. She even tried pouring oil into the cracks, hoping to loosen the rust, but nothing worked. Max was no help either, though he watched with eager eyes, as though expecting Sophie to succeed. Despite her failed attempts, Sophie didn't give up. She knew there had to be a way in, and the more she thought about it, the more determined she became. On the fourth day of trying, while sifting through some old boxes in the attic, Sophie found something unexpected. A leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and faded with age. It had been wedged beneath a stack of old linens. She blew the dust off it and opened it, the musty smell of old paper filling the air. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Carver, the original owner of the cabin. The entries were sporadic, some written in haste, others with a calm precision. Sophie's eyes caught one particular entry that piqued her interest. The house is more than it seems. It holds secrets beneath the floorboards, and there's a safe, locked away with things best left forgotten. If you are reading this, you have already found it. Sophie's heart raced. It was as though the journal was speaking directly to her. She turned the pages, her fingers trembling, and found more cryptic notes, detailing a strange relationship between Thomas and his family, and the house's hidden history. It became clear that the cabin had been a place of both creation and destruction, and its buried secrets were far more than anyone could have imagined. The last entry was a warning. Do not seek what is hidden. If you open the safe, you open a door that cannot be closed. Sophie's mind spun. She had already opened the door. Now, she needed to understand what was locked inside the safe. The mystery deepened with every page she read. There was something more to this house, something beyond the physical, something that reached deep into the past, pulling Sophie further into its web. Sophie had learned that secrets weren't just buried under the floorboards of the old cabin. They were woven into the fabric of Pine Ridge itself. The town, with its dusty roads and creaking houses, had its own stories. Stories that no one dared speak aloud. But she needed answers. The safe, hidden in the dirt behind the cabin, was only the beginning. There had to be more. Sophie was determined to uncover it, no matter how deeply the town tried to bury its past. She spent the next few days walking the streets, asking the few residents who still lived in the area about the Carvers. Most of the locals quickly brushed her off, their expressions shifting uneasily when she brought up the name. It was clear that the Carvers' legacy was not something people wanted to revisit. The town itself had a strange atmosphere, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The few shops in the center of town were quiet, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing in the trees. Sophie's inquiries led her to a few isolated stories, fragments of a long-forgotten history. But there was one person she had to speak to: Old Man Hawkins. Hawkins was a hermit, living in a small cabin far from town. He had lived in Pine Ridge longer than anyone else, and he was one of the few people who seemed willing to talk about the Carvers. Sophie had heard whispers that Hawkins knew more than he let on, so she decided to take the long walk up the mountain to find him. The air grew colder as Sophie made her way deeper into the forest, the path winding through thick pines that blocked the sunlight. It felt as though the mountain was swallowing her whole, and with every step, the town seemed farther away. When she finally reached Hawkins' cabin, she knocked, feeling a sense of unease she couldn't shake. The door creaked open, revealing a man who was as much a part of the mountain as the trees themselves. His face was leathery and weathered, his eyes sharp despite his age. He looked at Sophie with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "What do you want, girl?" Hawkins rasped, his voice like gravel. He didn't seem particularly pleased to see her, but there was a faint trace of something else, recognition perhaps. Sophie introduced herself and explained her reason for visiting. She told him about the cabin, the safe, and the journal she had found. At first, Hawkins was reluctant to speak, but Sophie's persistence wore him down. Slowly, the story began to unfold. "The Carvers were cursed," Hawkins muttered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to overhear. "They came here long ago, looking for something. They thought they'd found it in that cabin." His voice dropped to a whisper, and Sophie leaned in closer. They were wrong. Hawkins explained that the Carvers had discovered an ancient power buried deep within the cabin, something that was never meant to be found. He spoke of strange rituals, of symbols carved into the walls and hidden compartments in the house. The Carvers had thought they could harness this power, but in the end, it consumed them. It was said that they disappeared one night, leaving the house behind, and the town had never been the same since. Sophie felt her pulse quicken. The more Hawkins spoke, the clearer it became. The Carvers hadn't just disappeared, they had uncovered something dangerous, something that the town had tried to forget. And now, Sophie was tangled up in their story. "I'm warning you, miss," Hawkins said, his voice shaky. "That house isn't like other houses. And what's buried there? It's not just a safe, it's a tomb. Whatever's inside is more than just gold or jewels." Sophie didn't know what to say. She had already opened the safe, and the key she had found only raised more questions. What was the real treasure? And why had Hawkins warned her to stop? Before she left, Hawkins handed her a weathered map. It was old, frayed at the edges, and drawn in a shaky hand. The map outlined the layout of the cabin and surrounding land, with strange markings in places Sophie had yet to explore. One of the markings was near the fireplace, with an X placed at the base. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Was this another hidden compartment? Another clue? "I can't stop you from digging around," Hawkins said, his voice distant. "But I can't promise you'll like what you find." Sophie returned to the cabin with the map clutched in her hand, the weight of Hawkins' words heavy on her shoulders. The air felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of danger. Max, who had been so carefree in the beginning, seemed more restless. His usual barks and tail wags were replaced by nervous pacing, as though he too sensed something lurking in the shadows of the cabin. Sophie unfolded the map, by the light of the dimming sun, tracing her finger over the drawn lines. The markings were faint but distinct, showing rooms and paths she hadn't yet explored. The X, near the fireplace, seemed to beckon her, an invitation to uncover something hidden, something important. She'd been avoiding the fireplace, thinking it nothing more than an old feature of the cabin, but now, with the map in hand, she felt a pull she couldn't resist. She moved quickly, her heart thumping in her chest as she made her way to the old stone hearth. The fireplace had seen better days, the mortar cracked and the stones worn smooth from years of use. But now, it felt different, like it was waiting for her. Max stood by the doorway, his eyes following her every move as she crouched before the fireplace. Sophie examined the area carefully, running her hands along the stones, searching for anything that seemed out of place. The hearth was cold, but there was a strange stillness in the air around it. She ran her fingers along the base of the stone, and that's when she felt a slight gap between two of the stones. She pressed harder, and the stone gave way, revealing a narrow compartment hidden beneath the floor of the hearth. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Could this be it? Was this the next step in uncovering the cabin's secrets? With trembling hands, she pulled the stone away, revealing a small, dark space. Inside was an old rusted metal box almost identical to the one she had unearthed behind the cabin. This box, however, was even older. Its surface was marked with symbols Sophie recognized from the journal. They were the same markings the carvers had written about, the same ones Hawkins had warned her about. Max barked suddenly, causing Sophie to jump. She looked up, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the quiet, eerie shadows of the cabin. Sophie swallowed hard. She knew, without a doubt, that whatever was inside this box would change everything. There was no turning back now. Her heart raced as she pulled the box free from its hiding place. The feeling of being watched intensified, and for the first time, Sophie wondered if she was alone in the cabin. Something or someone was still lurking in the shadows. Sophie sat in the dimly lit cabin, the metal box resting heavily in her lap. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Max had gone quiet, his usual energy replaced by an unsettling stillness. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she inspected the box, its surface covered in the same cryptic symbols that had haunted her thoughts since discovering the journal. These markings weren't just random, they were part of something far larger, something ancient. She carefully turned the box over, looking for any indication of how to open it. The lock was old, but sturdy, with intricate designs that seemed to shift in the flickering light of the lantern. Sophie hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. Whatever this box contained, it felt like the final key to understanding the mysteries of the house. But what if it wasn't just a treasure hidden for safekeeping? What if it was something darker, something the carvers had tried to protect? Max let out a low growl, his ears flattened, and Sophie glanced up sharply, her heart skipping a beat. It was as if he sensed something. She couldn't see something just beyond the edge of her perception. She stood, placing the box on the small wooden table, and began pacing the cabin, trying to calm the rising unease. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and adding to the eerie atmosphere. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the house was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. A sudden knock on the door broke the silence. Sophie froze. She hadn't expected anyone, especially not this far up the mountain. The knock came again, louder this time. Her heart pounded in her chest as she crossed the room and slowly opened the door. Standing on the threshold was none other than Old Man Hawkins. His face was grim, his weathered hands resting on the handle of a crooked walking stick. Sophie's stomach twisted at the sight of him. She had hoped she wouldn't have to see him again, but something in his eyes told her this was no coincidence. "You opened it, didn't you?" Hawkins asked, his voice low and gravelly. His gaze flicked to the box on the table inside the cabin, then back to Sophie. He didn't wait for an answer, stepping past her and into the cabin without permission. "I warned you," he muttered, as though speaking more to himself than to Sophie. "You should have left it alone." Sophie closed the door behind him, unsure of what to say. She had already opened the safe, and now the second box was before her. There was no going back. The curiosity was too powerful, the need for answers too great. "I found this," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly as she gestured to the box. "What is it? What does it mean?" Hawkins didn't answer right away. Instead, he approached the table and stared down at the box, his brow furrowed in concern. He reached out, but Sophie quickly pulled it away, feeling an instinctive need to protect it. He sighed, sitting down heavily in the nearest chair. "Those symbols," Hawkins began, "belonged to the carvers, but not in the way you think. They weren't just ordinary people. They were part of something much darker. The house. It was never just a house. It was a vessel, a place where something was hidden, something not meant to be found." Sophie's heart raced. "What are you saying? What's inside this box?" Hawkins looked at her, his eyes sharp and filled with a quiet desperation. "It's not a treasure. It's a key to something far worse. Something the carvers uncovered and it changed them. That safe you opened, and the box you found, they're part of an old ritual, one that was meant to stay sealed for eternity. You don't want to know what's inside." The words sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. She thought back to the journal, the warning it contained. "Do not seek what is hidden. If you open the safe, you open a door that cannot be closed." Sophie had ignored the warning before. Now, sitting face to face with Hawkins, she was beginning to understand why. "I have to open it," Sophie whispered, more to herself than to Hawkins. "I need to know. I need to understand what the carvers were trying to protect." Hawkins shot her a look that was equal parts sadness and fear. "It's not a matter of wanting to know, Sophie. It's a matter of surviving what you might find. You think you're the first to come across it? You think you're the first to try and unlock the secrets of the carver's past?" He stood, his voice growing more urgent. "You don't know what you're dealing with. I've seen it before, people who thought they could control it. They were wrong." Sophie's eyes flicked to the box. The temptation was overwhelming. She felt like a moth drawn to a flame. But Hawkins' words echoed in her mind. What was in the box? What had the carvers unearthed all those years ago that had turned them into nothing more than a memory? Max barked again, louder this time, his body tense. Sophie turned to him, startled by his sudden outburst. He had always been a calm and reliable companion, but now he seemed to be reacting to something only he could see. A chill crept over her. "I can't stop now," Sophie said, her voice barely audible. "I have to know what's inside. You're not going to stop me, are you?" Hawkins didn't answer at first. He simply stood, his hand clutching his walking stick tightly, as if weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Sophie. But if you're determined to go through with it, there's no stopping you." Sophie's fingers hovered over the lock on the box. Hawkins' warning still hung in the air, but the moment had arrived. She had come this far. Now, it was time to see what lay beyond the veil. With one final glance at Hawkins, Sophie slowly unlocked the box. The box creaked open, its ancient hinges protesting as Sophie lifted the lid. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Hawkins stood at the edge of the room, his face pale, his knuckles white, on the edge of the table. Max, who had been growling softly, suddenly went silent, watching Sophie with wide, wary eyes. Inside the box, Sophie found a small, weathered envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp, an intricate symbol she recognized from the carver's journal. The envelope was thin but heavy, as if it contained something far more significant than its size suggested. Sophie hesitated for a moment, the weight of Hawkins' warning still pressing on her shoulders. But her curiosity was stronger. She carefully peeled the wax away, then slid the letter from the envelope. The paper inside was brittle, the ink faded but still legible. It was a single page, written in the same hand as the journal she had found earlier. "To the one who finds this house, know that you are not the first to seek what lies beneath. The key has always been buried, hidden from the world. But there are others who have come before you, those who thought they could control what was never meant to be known. They were wrong, and so will you be. I, Thomas Carver, built this house with my family to protect what we uncovered. The safe you have opened is only the beginning. The truth is buried beneath the earth, deeper than you can imagine. But beware, for once you uncover the full truth, there will be no turning back. It will change you, as it changed us. If you choose to continue, know that you are not alone. The house is alive with its secrets, and it will guide you or destroy you. Do not seek what is hidden, for it will claim you just as it claimed us. Thomas Carver. Sophie felt the blood drain from her face as she read the final words. The letter was a warning, just like the journal. But it also felt like an invitation. She glanced at Hawkins, whose face was twisted in anguish. The room seemed colder now, the shadows deeper. The letter in her hand trembled as if the words were alive, pressing against her palm. I told you, Hawkins said softly, his voice a mere whisper. You've opened Pandora's box. Sophie stood frozen, the letter in her hand like a weight too heavy to bear. The words Thomas Carver had written seemed to echo through the cabin, reverberating off the walls in a way that made the air feel thicker, heavier. Hawkins' gaze never left her, as he slowly shook his head, his face a mask of regret. You should have listened, he murmured. The house has a way of reacting. You've disturbed something that was meant to stay buried. Sophie didn't know what to say. Every instinct told her to stop, to put the letter down and walk away. But the truth was, she was already too deep. The secrets, the mystery of the cabin, of the Carvers, had consumed her since the moment she stepped foot inside. Now that the door had been opened, there was no going back. Max, ever watchful, began to growl again, this time low and guttural. Sophie glanced over at him, but the dog's eyes were fixed on something in the corner of the room, his body stiff with tension. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The shadows in the room seemed darker, thicker than they should have been. Max? Sophie called softly, but the dog didn't respond. He was too focused, too unnerved. Sophie's pulse quickened. She moved toward the door, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. But as she stepped into the hallway, something caught her eye. The air around the fireplace shimmered as if the light itself was warping. A chill ran through her, colder than the wind outside. The house felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Are you seeing this? Sophie asked Hawkins, who had followed her into the hallway. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. I warned you, Hawkins whispered, his voice shaking. The house, it reacts to the key, to the safe. Every time someone disturbs its secrets, it wakes up a little more. The floor creaked beneath their feet, a low rumble, as though the house was shifting. Sophie stepped back, her breath coming faster now. This wasn't just a house anymore, it was something else, something ancient. The very air seemed to hum with energy, as though the walls themselves were alive with memories and power. Suddenly, the ground beneath Sophie's feet seemed to give way. She stumbled, her hand grabbing the doorframe for balance. She looked down beneath the floorboards. There was an opening, a crack. It had always been there, but now it was wider. Something was moving beneath the cabin. No, Sophie breathed. This can't be happening. Max's growl intensified, his eyes wide with terror as he backed into the corner. Hawkins stumbled back as well, his face pale, with a mixture of fear and resignation. The house is angry, Hawkins said, his voice barely audible. The more you uncover, the more it demands. You've disturbed it, Sophie. And now, it's awake. Sophie didn't know what to do. The cabin felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing inward, as if it was trying to swallow her whole. She looked at the letter again, reading Thomas Carver's words one more time, as if hoping for some kind of answer. The words, "The house is alive with its secrets, and it will guide you or destroy you," rang in her mind, clear and undeniable. Sophie was at a crossroads. She had opened the safe, found the key, and now she stood on the brink of something far darker than she had ever imagined. Whatever was hidden beneath the floor was not just a treasure, it was a force, and it was ready to be unleashed. Sophie turned to Hawkins. What do we do now? Hawkins' face was ashen. Now, we try to survive. Sophie stood frozen, her heart pounding as the shadow in the corner of the cabin seemed to stretch and shift. It wasn't just a trick of the light, this was something else. The air around her grew heavier, the temperature plummeting. Max growled low, his eyes fixed on the figure in the corner. The shadow loomed taller now, a dark, indistinct form that seemed to pulse with energy. Sophie could feel its presence, cold and ancient, like it had been waiting for this moment. She took a cautious step back, her hand still clutching the key. Hawkins was silent, his eyes wide with terror. It's the house, Hawkins whispered, his voice shaky. It's alive, and it's coming for you. Sophie could barely breathe. The figure in the corner began to move, slow and deliberate. A cold wind stirred around the room, swirling dust and debris in its wake. Sophie's instinct screamed at her to run, to leave the cabin and never return. But the pull of the key was stronger now. It called to her, urging her to stay, to uncover whatever lay hidden within the house. The figure stepped forward, its outline becoming clearer. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a person. A man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He reached toward her, and Sophie's feet felt rooted to the floor. "I have to know," Sophie whispered to herself, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. Max barked loudly, breaking the silence. The figure paused, its attention shifting toward the dog. Sophie seized the moment. She turned, bolted toward the door, and fled into the night. Sophie ran into the cold night, the wind biting at her skin. The trees around the cabin loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying with unnatural movement. Max barked ahead of her, urging her forward. But Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still with her, lurking just beyond the edges of her vision. She had no idea where to go, only that she couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. She needed answers, but the terror that gripped her now was overwhelming. The figure, the cold air, the strange pull of the key, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. Max tugged at her, pulling her toward a clearing in the woods. Sophie paused, glancing around. The shadow was no longer visible, but the sense of being watched lingered. Her hands still clenched the key. She didn't know why it had such power over her, but she couldn't let it go. In the center of the clearing, something caught her eye. A faint glow, almost like a door had opened in the air. Sophie's breath hitched. It was a doorway, a portal that hadn't been there moments before. It shimmered and wavered, and Sophie could hear whispers coming from the other side. It was calling her. "Max," she whispered. "What is this?" The dog sat beside her, as if waiting for her to make a choice. With trembling hands, Sophie stepped forward, toward the unseen door. The moment Sophie crossed the threshold, the air shifted, and she felt herself falling. But it wasn't like falling through the earth. It was as if she was being pulled through time itself. The world around her blurred, colors swirling like a vortex, until suddenly, everything snapped into place. Sophie landed on cold stone, the floor beneath her harsh and unyielding. She stood, blinking in confusion. The air was thick, filled with the scent of earth and decay. Max was beside her, his body tense, but his eyes scanning the surroundings. They were in a hidden chamber, underground, far beneath the cabin. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, symbols Sophie recognized from the journal, from the key. The chamber was vast, filled with the same oppressive energy that had filled the cabin. Sophie's heart raced as she slowly took in her surroundings. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and atop it rested a large, ornate box, its surface covered in the same cryptic symbols. The box was the same size as the one she had found earlier, but it felt more important. Max whimpered, his ears flat against his head. Sophie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She could sense the power in the room, like a current flowing beneath the ground, waiting to be unleashed. She moved closer to the pedestal, her hand trembling as she reached for the box. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the chamber seemed to pulse with life, and Sophie knew she was on the edge of uncovering something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Sophie's fingers trembled as they brushed against the surface of the ornate box. The chamber seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick and charged. For a moment, she stood still, absorbing the gravity of the situation. She could feel the power beneath her fingertips, as if the box itself was alive, waiting for her to make the next move. The whispers that had lingered in the air now grew louder, but they were incomprehensible, faint voices speaking in a language Sophie didn't recognize. Max growled softly, his eyes fixed on the black's pedestal, his body tense. Sophie glanced down at him, then back at the box. The feeling that something was watching her, something ancient and powerful, crawled up her spine. She had come so far, uncovered the secrets of the cabin, the key, the safe. She had been warned at every step, but still, she had pressed forward. And now, standing before this relic, she had to wonder, what was she really searching for? What truth could possibly justify what she was about to do? But her curiosity, her need for answers, drove her forward. Sophie took a deep breath and lifted the box off the pedestal. The instant her hands grasped it, the room seemed to shift. The carvings on the walls glowed faintly, their lines pulsing like veins under skin. The ground beneath her feet hummed with an energy she could feel in every bone of her body. Max barked suddenly, his voice echoing in the chamber. Sophie jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. But before she could react, the box in her hands began to tremble. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, and Sophie could make out snippets of words, fragments of sentences. Open it. Release. Bound to the earth. Sophie's grip on the box tightened, but the energy surging through it was too much to ignore. The sensation of being pulled toward the box was overwhelming, and as her fingers touched the lid, she realized she had no choice but to open it. The box wasn't just a container, it was a key in itself. A key to something far beyond her comprehension. With a sense of inevitability, she pried the lid open. As it cracked, a gust of cold wind blew through the chamber, extinguishing the flickering light from the walls. Darkness flooded in, suffocating the room. Sophie gasped, her pulse racing, as she leaned over the box. Inside, instead of gold or jewels, was a small, perfectly smooth stone black as night and warm to the touch. It pulsed with an inner light, a dark glow that seemed to move, shifting, beneath the surface. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Max whimpered again, his fur standing on end. Sophie's hand hovered above the stone, drawn to it, but her mind screamed at her to stop. This was the moment, the point of no return. She could feel it, deep in her bones. The stone was not just a relic. It was the heart of the house, the source of its power, and whatever had been sealed away for so long was now free. Her breath caught, as she slowly lifted the stone from its resting place. The instant her fingers made contact with it, the chamber shook violently, and the whispers turned to a roar, an overwhelming, deafening sound that rattled her teeth. The stone flared with light, and Sophie felt a surge of heat wash over her. She stumbled backward, the world spinning around her, the chamber warping and shifting, as if the very fabric of reality was bending. Max barked frantically, but Sophie could barely hear him over the roar of energy surrounding her. And then everything stopped. The light vanished, leaving Sophie in complete darkness. She gasped for air, her head spinning. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, the stone still clutched tightly in her hand. Max stood beside her, trembling, his eyes wide with fear. What had she done? The chamber was silent now, but the air felt thick, with something darker. Something was watching her, waiting. Sophie's heart raced as she struggled to regain her bearings. The whispers had stopped, but they had left a lasting imprint on her mind. The house, no, the entire mountain had changed, and so had she. Sophie's mind was racing, the world still spinning around her as the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. The stone, still warm in her hand, felt like a weight from another world. It was as if the earth itself had opened beneath her, and she was teetering on the nutter edge of something ancient, something unknowable. Max was still by her side, his body trembling, his eyes fixed on the walls, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Sophie could feel the unease radiating from him, as though he could sense what she had only begun to understand. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had changed the moment she touched the stone. With a great effort, Sophie pushed herself up from the cold stone floor. Her legs wobbled beneath her, the room still feeling like it was shifting with every movement. She glanced around, trying to steady herself. The carvings on the walls seemed to be moving now, the symbols twisting and writhing like living creatures. The once still chamber now felt like it was breathing, its walls expanding and contracting in time with her heartbeat. The whispers had returned, but this time, they were different. They were louder, clearer, and more insistent. Sophie could make out bits and pieces of the voices, but they were disjointed, like fragments of a conversation from another time. You've opened the door. It's too late now. We warned you. The price. The house. It's awake. The words washed over her, familiar yet alien, like an ancient memory trying to claw its way to the surface. She could feel the stone pulsing in her hand, its dark glow flickering like a heartbeat. It was calling to her, urging her to go further, to see the truth. Sophie swallowed hard, her throat dry. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. She didn't expect an answer. How could she? The house didn't speak, it acted. And now, she had awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. Max whined softly, his tail between his legs, and Sophie's gaze shifted to the far corner of the chamber. The shadows were deeper there now, darker than the rest of the room. It was as if something was moving, something alive, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Sophie's pulse quickened. She took a hesitant step forward, the stone still gripped tightly in her hand. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate as she moved, the air thickening, almost viscous, as if the very atmosphere was reacting to her presence. The walls of the chamber were closing in. She could feel it, whatever had been trapped here. It was stirring. And then, in the farthest corner of the room, something emerged. It wasn't a figure. It wasn't a shape she could define. It was more like a presence, something formless but immense, stretching and contracting like it was shifting in and out of reality. It was like the house itself was coming alive in front of her, an embodiment of the energy she had released. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The stone in her hand grew hot, almost burning her skin. She wanted to drop it, throw it away, but it was as though the stone had become part of her, a connection to whatever had been awakened beneath the earth. The presence moved closer, its shape still not fully defined, but the feeling of it pressing in on her was unmistakable. Sophie could feel it in her chest, a weight like a stone pressing on her heart. "You are the one who has freed us," a voice echoed through the room, deep and reverberating, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "Now, you will take our place." Sophie's legs buckled beneath her, and she dropped to her knees, the stone burning her hand like an iron. The words echoed in her mind, over and over, as though they were being drilled into her skull. She looked down at the stone, realizing the truth that had been hidden from her all along. The key wasn't just a tool to unlock the past. It was a part of a much darker plan, and now she had triggered it. She wasn't just a witness to the house's awakening, she was a participant. The chamber seemed to breathe deeper, the shadows closing in. The presence was no longer just a voice. It was something else, something tangible, and it was drawing nearer. Sophie realized with a cold jolt of horror that she had just begun the real journey. The house was no longer just a building. It was a prison, and now, she was part of it. Sophie's breath came in ragged gasps, her chest tightening with the weight of the presence that filled the chamber. The stone in her hand was burning hotter now, and her mind was racing with the implications of what she had just awakened. The air was thick with a suffocating energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around her. She could feel it, pulsing in the ground beneath her, surging through the walls, and rising from the depths below. The voice, deep and resonant, still echoed in her mind, its words repeating over and over like a chant. "You are the one who has freed us." The weight of those words settled on her like a crushing stone. She had opened the box, taken the key, and unleashed something far older, far darker, than she could have ever imagined. The house, the land, even the stone itself, it had all been part of some ancient, forgotten ritual. And now, Sophie was part of it. Max's frantic barking broke through her thoughts, and she looked down at him. The dog, usually brave and loyal, was trembling, his eyes wide with fear. He backed away from her, as if sensing the danger that had now become a part of their lives. Sophie felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. She had brought this upon him, too. The presence in the chamber moved closer, its form still shifting in the shadows, like something that didn't quite belong to this world. It was as if the very fabric of reality was warping around it, bending to its will. Sophie wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt heavy, like the house itself was holding her in place. "Now, you will take our place," the voice continued. "You will become the vessel for the power that has been locked away for centuries." Sophie's pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Vessel? What did that mean? Was she supposed to become like them? The shadows around her seemed to grow, expanding, reaching out toward her. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and Sophie realized with growing horror that the chamber itself was alive. It was a living entity, a prison, and she had just cracked open its door. Max barked again, more desperately this time. Sophie's eyes flicked to the dog, and she realized she had to act. She had to do something to stop this. She couldn't let herself become part of whatever this was. She couldn't let the house claim her. But the stone still warm in her hand was a constant pull, an insistent call. It was a connection to whatever was stirring in the shadows. She could feel its power, its promise, and its curse. Every instinct told her to throw it away, to leave this place and never look back. But Sophie knew she couldn't. The house would never let her go. It had already chosen her. The voice grew louder, its power suffusing the chamber, shaking the very air around her. "You are ours now," Sophie gasped, the words like ice in her veins. She had no choice anymore. She had unleashed this power, and now she had to face the consequences. But there was something else, something deeper, buried within the stone's power. She could feel it, a faint whisper beneath the surface, a memory locked within the stone itself. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to recede. The presence, for a moment, faded, and the oppressive weight in the room lifted. Sophie blinked, unsure if the shift was real or just a trick of her exhausted mind. "Max," she whispered hoarsely. "We have to leave. Now." She turned, looking for an escape, but the walls around her seemed to close in, the shadows tightening like a trap. The house wasn't letting them go. It was holding them, keeping them inside, just like it had held the carvers and everyone else who had dared to disturb its slumber. Sophie gripped the stone tighter, feeling its pulse in her hand, and realized with a jolt that it wasn't just the house that had been awakened. It was her, too. She had become part of the house, part of the force that had been locked away for so long. And now, there was no turning back. Sophie's heart raced as the figure of Thomas Carver emerged from the shadows, his form growing clearer with each step. The realization hit her like a hammer. She was face to face with the ghost, or, perhaps, the remnant of the very man whose actions had led to the curse that now gripped the house. His eyes, hollow and unblinking, seemed to look through her, not at her. The air felt thick with the weight of his presence, the silence between them deafening. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Sophie whispered, her throat tight with a mix of fear and guilt. "I only wanted to know the truth." Carver's form didn't shift, but his voice, when it came, was low and full of sorrow. "Truth," he murmured, almost as if tasting the word. "You think you're the first to seek it? The first to break the seal?" His voice grew stronger, as if the words carried the weight of centuries. "We were once like you, hungry for knowledge. We thought we could control it, use it. But this house, this place, it consumes." Sophie backed away, her feet stumbling as she grasped the stone tighter. The connection between them, the house, the stone, Carver felt suffocating. She knew the price was coming, but she didn't know how much she was willing to pay. "You freed me," Carver continued, his form flickering. "But that power, that knowledge, it's too much for any one soul. It consumes everything." Max barked, his presence beside her a small comfort, but Sophie could feel the pull of the house deep in her bones. Whatever Carver had unleashed, whatever he had wanted, it was happening now. And there was no stopping it. The words Carver spoke echoed in Sophie's mind, refusing to leave. It consumes everything. The house, the stone, the power. It had all been waiting for this moment, and Sophie had unwittingly opened the door. She couldn't escape now. The presence of Carver, or whatever remained of him, was a constant weight on her shoulders, like a pressure that wouldn't relent. The shadows in the room seemed to close in, their movements slow but deliberate, as if the walls themselves were drawing tighter. Max was by her side, but even he seemed affected by the dark energy that hung in the air. His fur bristled, and his body trembled, yet he stayed close to her, offering whatever comfort he could. Sophie took another step backward, but the chamber seemed to shift. The walls moved with her, closing in as though the space were alive, pushing her forward toward the pedestal. The stone still burned in her hand, the heat of it radiating outward, pulling her toward the epicenter of this ancient force. "Why?" Sophie choked out, her voice raw. "Why did you do it? Why did you hide this power?" Carver's form flickered again, the shadows around him swirling like a storm. "We didn't know," he said, his voice shaking with regret. "We thought we could harness it, bend it to our will. But the house, it has its own will. It was never meant to be used. We were fools." Sophie felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she didn't know why. What had she done? She wasn't just facing the consequences of Carver's actions, she was facing the consequences of her own. She had set the house free. And now, she could feel it was beginning to claim her. Sophie couldn't breathe. The air in the chamber grew denser, colder, as the walls seemed to close in on her, the space shrinking with every breath she took. The stone burned against her palm, its pulse now frantic, as if the house itself were drawing its final breath before the door to the past was shut forever. Sophie's mind raced. Her thoughts jumbled as she looked, desperately at the walls, the ceiling, the door. The last door, she muttered, the words coming unbidden. The whisper in her head was faint, but insistent. It was the voice of the house, or maybe the remnants of Carver. She didn't know, but she knew it was telling her something. Something that could save her, or destroy her. Her eyes snapped back to the pedestal, to the stone she held in her hand. The carvings in the chamber, those twisting symbols, were coming to life, shifting and moving. The house wasn't just alive, it was pulling her deeper into its grip. Max's whimper broke through the tension. Sophie looked down at him, seeing the fear in his eyes, and it was like a switch had flipped inside her. She had to act. She had to find the door, the one thing that could end this nightmare. The stone in her hand flared once more, brighter than before. And then, with a sudden surge, the shadows retreated just for a moment. Sophie turned and saw it. A door, hidden in the farthest corner of the chamber, where none had been before. It shimmered, barely visible in the dim light, but it was there. With a final look at Max, she sprinted toward it, the stone still pulsing, but not in her hand. She had left it behind. She didn't need it anymore. Whatever power had claimed, the house had no hold on her anymore. She had chosen the only path that could set her free, the last door. The door creaked open as she pushed against it, and she stepped through into the unknown, the darkness of the house fading behind her. And for the first time since entering, Sophie felt the weight of the curse lift.